Right, so I'm glad to see you all here, and amazed at how many there are compared to 1969. I think there were about 8 of you, and I knew everybody by name, and they've all been here for 20 years before I got here, so very different staffing arrangement. As some of you may know, this is my second stint as president of the State Board of Education. I was Jerry Brown's education advisor in 1974. And was appointed to the board in 75. We were all 35 years old. Ray Davis, Jerry Brown, Mike Curtis, Bill Olney, all single. We used to hit the bars and Saturday. And now we're facing the rise of the septuagenarians, which includes Brown and myself. So I'm going to talk about the Common Core today. The other priority that we're currently working on is the School Finance Reform Program. Those of you that have children in schools want to take a look at that. It would be the first overhaul of the funding of the local schools, which districts get how much money since Proposition 13 passed in 1978. And there's a very good chance of getting that, and if you followed the budget yesterday, we're able to sweeten the pot and buy off more of our opponents, so I'm hoping that we will be able to get that through in June as well. Also, I was very pleased to see in the state budget announced yesterday that the governor supported $1 billion for implementation of what I'm going to talk about today, the Common Core. This is the largest appropriation of any state by miles, even given how big we are. So he is firmly committed to this, and I think you'll read various states are trying to rethink the Common Core, but I think California is committed to this concept. So my message today is one of big ideas of the Common Core. One of the biggest changes, in 2014, I will have been 50 years in the education policy business, having started in 1964 in the federal government. So it isn't one of the biggest things I've seen in my 50 years. I would put it fairly close to Lyndon Johnson's passage when I was very young in 1965 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So let me talk about the concepts, try and make it clear for you, and then my second message is how hard this is going to be to do, and what the challenges are in implementing it. This is really a sea change in what students will know, should know and be able to do, and it is a sea change in how teachers teach, and that is really very hard. So, the Common Core was an idea created by the National Governors Association, all the 50 state governors, and a group called the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is the state superintendents or heads of schools. They got this idea that we needed to rethink the American curriculum and the American assessments and everything else. And I was surprised by the rapid spread of this. My specialty here academically was the politics of education, and I had always featured how different all the states were, how difficult it was to get them to do much. So this idea takes off and is adopted by 45 states in the District of Columbia almost immediately. California adopted these standards under the former Governor Schwarzenegger in July 2010. So it spread very rapidly. And so a few states are talking about pulling out, but then Alaska just came in. The biggest state out is the Lone Star State of Texas, as one would expect. But it really is a nationwide movement. After that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the assessments today, not to dwell on assessments, but I can make this clear to you what's going on here by contrasting our current assessments to some of the Common Core examples. The Obama administration provided $350 million and then increased that to $380 million for 2 interstate consortiums. Basically, each one has half the states that are in the 45. And they are to do these radically new assessments, and you'll see those in a minute. And so this is a lot of money to completely develop assessments, $380 million, so that the group we're with, called Smarter Balance, has created 44,000 new test items in the last year and a half. And they're different kinds of tests, as you'll see. So far, the political attacks on Common Core as a movement have been rebuffed. The Tea Party came out against it. The Republican National Committee in the last month came out against Common Core. They are linking it to Obama's pushing it. Remember, it came from the bottom up through 2 state organizations. But Obama did also featured in his other policies, including a competition called Race to the Top, and they're calling it Obama Core, as a takeoff on Obamacare. But other Republicans are rushing to the barricades to defend this, and one of the leading ones is former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. So so far it's still on political track. I expect a few states will fall by the wayside here, and some may be added. So what's it all about? All right, the themes of Common Core. Remember, standards are really statements about what students should know and be able to do. So what they should, as they progress through school and exit, what they should know and be able to do. There's a lot of focus on do in terms of application of knowledge. First of all, the general critique of the American school curriculum, for example, particularly in mathematics, is that it's a mile wide and an inch deep. We cover many topics, often repetitively, race through content, and don't really focus on deep understanding and application of the concepts. So fewer is that these standards are less voluminous than the prior ones and much more focused. And you will teach things for a whole week or 2 rather than moving as rapidly as one did in the prior curriculum. So fewer is the first idea. Higher, though we did standards in America and have them in California now, we never coordinated them with post-secondary education. And I didn't use the word college because we're not talking about just 4-year college. We're talking about post-secondary education, which includes technical subjects that you can get short of a 4-year degree. This time, we actually align these new Common Core standards with what you need to know and be able to do to be successful once you go into post-secondary education. And we worked it back down deductively, if you will. California is the students leaving high school here and going on to community college, 70% of them are currently in remedial programs. At the California State University, 55% are in remedial programs. So there's obviously a disconnect between us and the next level with what standards and what we were having students do. And you'll see some of that in a minute. So that is, we very much have participation of higher education in this. The University of California is going to revise the high school courses they approved called A to G, for example. And I'll talk more about that. Deeper is a concept of deeper learning rather than just memorizing concepts or rules. In mathematics, a lot of students, Joe Bowler teaches here, they want to know what's the rule for solving the mathematics problem. And the less you don't get it, the more rules we give you. And then they don't have sense of what the mathematics is. They know rules, but some of you may have experienced that. So let me talk about some of the key aspects of it, but then I'll demonstrate it more directly. First of all, in English, the Common Core standards currently cover 2 subjects, English Language Arts and Mathematics. There is another subject coming online very soon called Next Generation Science Standards, which will have a lot more about applying scientific concepts and actually using them rather than memorizing terms. But there's no plans for history, social studies because of the various inability to agree in political aspects. So, So we'll reading increasingly complex text closely, much more in-depth reading. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. particularly here, I would emphasize nonfiction text. The complaints of the colleges are these students really can't read technical things very well. They can't read a biology book very well. They can't read a child development study. They have had a lot of literature, primarily British literature. But, you know, so much of what you get in college is not literature. I mean, there's Beowulf will only take you so far. And so we're not going to throw out the literature. That will be admittedly somewhat trimmed back. But there'll be much more what are called nonfiction or informational reading. Most of what you do in your work is that type of thing. So we will work much closer with that. Moreover, we're spreading the Common Core into science and the history of social studies so that those teachers are also reinforcing this text complexity. I'll demonstrate this abstract stuff more with the examples in a minute. They will communicate effectively across multiple media and content areas. There's a lot more on communication, speaking, writing, listening, and collaboration with each other. The idea of teamwork to solve problems is out there. Using evidence to interpret with justification. You have to read something and then justify it with more evidence than you've had that is in whatever you've read. And engaging in inquiry and research so that students will actually have to put things together and reach their own conclusions. And I've already talked about more mathematical reasoning and application, less rules, and using mathematics skills in other subjects. So here are some things. Linda Darling Hammond actually compiled many of these slides that I'm going to use now. And so here, if you look at these words, those are, to me, a good summarization of what we're trying to do. And as you can see there, take model, construct, compare, investigate, interpret. This is a lot different than what has been primarily in our textbooks and in our assessments, as I shall make clear in a minute. And so extending and applying is there. So if you're teaching today in schools and you're not doing much of this, and indeed the state's current curriculum frameworks in many cases don't have much of this in it, the standards don't have much in it, and the assessments, as you see, have very little in it. We have actually, in California for the last decade or so, been pushing schools away from this with our policies and particularly with our assessments. So I think this gives you a flavor of some of the new movement that we're working with here. So again, to look at the reading side of it, you'll see much more attempts to really look at evidence and informational text to support analysis. Now let me try to make this clear again. Linda helped me with these. Okay, this is the current tests are called the California Standards Test. Many of you young people in the room with children, have seen these. Your kids bring these tests home. The dreaded STAR test is going on, and it's just recently over. So this is an example of a mathematics problem that is there now. So contrast everything I've talked about with that problem. It's multiple choice. It asks you how you've solved the problem in some ways, but it's very abstract. It is a closed-end answer, A, B, C, D. 90% of California's current assessments, 92% are multiple choice closed-end. So now the new things are going to be inspired, the new assessments. Part of the assessments will be what are called performance exams or extended response. By the way, before I forget, these new assessments will be administered through computer adaptive methods. So if you're doing well on the items, it shifts you up. And if you're not doing well, it shifts you down. Some of you have had GRE or something like that that's been doing that. So here's an Australian problem. Many of our assessment items now are inspired by other countries. So there's a stackable chairs, a practical storage area must be found. And then here's what you're asked to do. Remember, we used the modeling as an idea. And so it's a much longer kind of exercise. Look how different that is from the current standards test. And you'll get a general idea that this is a jump switch. Now this also means it's going to be very hard to implement because we've not been doing a whole lot of that. Okay, then students in performance exams, some of the exams that we're going to be using are called performance exams. You're going to have to write things. They're going to be partially scored by the teacher, partially scored by a machine, but you're asked to do various things of this sort and keep journals and so on. Okay, now here is a California standards test. This is a current test. It's out there now. And you read something and then you pick out something very detailed in the text. These are interesting, and you read a very short passage, and then you carry out, you answer A, B, C, or D. You haven't seen the passage, but it's not very long, and you just bubble in the answer. And and so the teachers have objected to this as not very authentic learning. The California Teachers Association is an ardent supporter of the Common Core. Their main reservation was about the money, and we did help with that yesterday. Oops. So, all right. So we more of a kind of the performance exams, not a short answer one. But this would be a more complex reading. It's a non-fiction reading, as you see. So it is not, and it's pretty hard. This is grade 11. In that sense, talking about autism and other areas of that sort. And so you get the general idea of how difficult it is. It continues over here, where you have to work out various kinds of areas that you're going to work with. You have to look at the ages in a chart and things of this sort. So then there's an exam based on this, which would be computer adaptive, and some of it would be teacher support as well. So I think these give you some idea of the differences. Okay, so now, how do we implement this? This is a jump shift, a new paradigm, and I've got to be frank, I'm not sure I know exactly how we're going to do this, but I'll give you what we've got at this point. The first of these assessments is to be administered to all school children in California. That is 6.2 million school children. It'll just be some of those are kindergarten, so it'll be in the grades we assess in. And so the good news is we have done standards-based reform. We have a system driven by California standards tests at part. So we did this before. We just used different standards, different assessments, cheaper assessments. Our current assessments cost $10 a pupil, $10 per pupil to give the assessment, the bubbling, and the new ones will cost between $23 and $28. When you're dealing with a $70 billion budget, the differences in testing are really minuscule, but the differences in other things will be huge. So we know basically how to do this. And we have learned that all relevant state policies need to be aligned to Common Core, and coherence are crucial. So you need to have your policies in a row, and this talks about state policy. I could give another talk on local implementation. Okay, so here's basically the concept, and give you a little bit of idea as to how much we're dealing with at the state level. At the center of this are the Common Core standards, and in that regard, it drives every other policy. So we've got to look at all these policies around in the wheel, and I'll talk about, you mentioned them briefly, but we've got to make sure we have policies for all these areas. All our old policies are not aligned and not coherent with the Common Core. So we got to make sure we don't have gaps. We've got to make sure that the assessments, there's no conflicts. The assessments match the materials and match the standards, for example. And we've got to have depth to implement these. We have 310,000 teachers. That means we have to deal with many of those teachers, or help many of those teachers to teach the Common Core. So starting in the center there, the content, we've adopted the standards, then we've adopted frameworks for teachers on how to teach this in English, language arts, and math, or we'll shortly do that. But we have to change. The state in California endorses or adopts textbooks and materials, so we have to change and have changed our criteria for that. And then we have digital materials we're using. So that you have to, every publisher out there, the day after the Common Core was endorsed by the state, said, here's our Common Core aligned materials. Buy these today. And that's a bunch of baloney, because they slapped 42 pages on the back and said it's aligned with the Common Core. So all of our current textbooks, most of them are up in smoke in terms of being useful, and digital materials as well. That's why there is some extra money needed here, in addition to the money that's coming in over the next 5 years. So that's there. The hardest one will be the principal teacher policy. There you have pre-service teacher education. Much of that has not been aligned with the Common Core. No reason it should be. They were really looking at other standards. In-service education, sometimes called professional development, which is a better term, I didn't have room for it. That is really to take the existing teachers and work with them. They're already teaching, so they're not going to be helped by pre-service Stanford School of Education. So we have already extensive programs for county offices and other areas. Joe Bowler from the School of Education is putting up a MOOC for mathematics teachers for this summer. Linda Darling Hammond and others will be putting up a MOOC in 214, so we expect Roy P. will be really the key person behind that. We expect some help from digital training, but right now, having all this professional development is really still needs to be undertaken quickly. Some money will help, but not all of it. Evaluation is a big issue of teachers. California has not used our tests as a statewide requirement, but many states do, and some districts do. So when if you've been evaluating a teacher, the big argument in teacher policy has been, we need to evaluate teachers based on student performance. That's been the biggest controversy in the last 5 years, whether we should be doing that or not. The rejoinder of the teachers, with which I have some sympathy, is, I might be willing to be evaluated on outcomes of pupils, but not on those tests you give. That's not, and so that'll be a new discussion with new assessments, which the teachers now say are aligned with what they think is their professional ability. So we'll be rethinking evaluation. State assessments I've talked about. I won't talk about those in any greater detail. They obviously need to be overhauled. Special education. When I left the state board in 1982, special education was 11% of general operating funds of school districts in the state. Now it is 21% and rising. Wow, the general operating. I've got an autism curve like that, and in terms of where that is going. So the policies there, we need to be more into prevention of students getting into needs for special education. But for example, in assessments, we give special education students a modified assessment of some of them, not all of them. And so that needs to be reworked and aligned with the Common Core. It's currently there now. The finance system, I've mentioned the governor promised the legislature to oppose his finance reform, the fight of their lives. He said yesterday there's more money for low-income school districts, and so he defended that by saying when he sees people from Palo Alto moving to Compton and Watts in LA, then I'll think he's spending too much maybe, or he hasn't found it. So I expect this exodus to go to Watts from Palo Alto again. So the basic problem with the finance program is not only that it's essentially a flat grant and has no adjustments of significance for special needs, it's an historical accretion of nonsense and complexity. There's about 20 people that understand the current school finance system. I'm one of them. There's 19 others. And those 19 make a lot more money than I do as, selling their services. So it's extremely complex, but the main problem is it has 42 separate categorical earmarks. We have earmarks for counselors, librarians, school gardens, special reading programs. Some of these go back to the 1970s. And so the governor's proposing to eliminate most of the categorical programs and simplify the system, make it much more flexible, and then they can use, the school districts, the flexible money to implement Common Core. So that is another area we're arguing, and I think justifiably, that you can't get to Common Core without revoking the finance program. Right now we've got 30% of the school district's budget is tied up in these categorical programs, and they can't move the money, and we have 4 floors of people in Sacramento where my office there is with enforcing this, so hopefully they would move to other pursuits. So, English learners. We have in this state 1.6 million English learners who cannot function in English in the classroom. It's an astounding amount in those terms. And we have, not been getting this right. Our school population now is 53% Hispanic and rises a percent a year. So we're really growing in that aspect. So English learners curriculum has been particularly ineffective. The state has now come up with an entirely new framework and approach for what is called English language development. It is aligned with Common Core, based on Common Core. 2 of the people in this very school were crucial in this. 3 of them, Kenji Ikuda, Guadalupe Valdez, and Claude Goldenberger, all worked on this for the state. And Kenji Ikuda has a lot of national money to do this in other states. We have a really nice looking English language policy on paper. How to get it into the classrooms. The one thing is, somewhat still daunting and somewhat still unclear. One thing about the Common Core is it is very language rich and language complex. You saw that with that item I gave. So you're going to have to, this is even higher lift in that regard. Career and technical education is, so there's, the Common Core standards are called college and career ready. And so career ready is around the more technical subjects that you get at community colleges and increasingly at for-profit institutions. 1 out of 10 of California's degrees and certificates last year were awarded by for-profit institutions. So we are aligning the Common Core and reworking the curriculum and the career and technical education programs with it. College readiness. So you as parents will begin to get markers on whether your student is, quote, post-secondary education ready, college and career ready, as early as 5th grade. You'll get it in 8th grade, we will have a standard. It's not called proficiency, it's called college and career ready. You will, at the 11th grade, you will know, and hopefully then you will to move forward on this. So there is it's really, as I said, aligned, and the post-secondary education is participating in setting this standard. So the new standard that will be college and career ready, and I talked about college. And then waivers and flexibility. The State Board of Education that I'm part of is able to give waivers to a lot of the education code. At my age, I don't try to lift the education code in California. I mean, it's, the legislature's up there, they think they're elected to legislate, and they pass 100 bills no matter what. Even, I mean, their idea is get bills through, carry bills, get them through, and so this thicket is going up, and the governor's proposed a lot of reduction of mandates that we now have in the books. So I'm not going to, because I want to leave plenty some time for discussion, but you know, this is the sort of world I'm in. You'll see the Common Core standards, and then we have a panel for English language development, and then we're working on next generation science standards. But if you look at these timelines, you should be worried, because if the first assessment is taking place in 2014, 2015, we're going to have an assessment before we even have the materials in English language arts, because of the need in California to integrate English learners into the English language arts curriculum. It's more complex. So the first years of this assessment will be a baseline. And California's always measured base and then growth, so it's growth based. So one would assume the initial base will be pretty low because it's a big shift, but then, you know, as people get more used to it, there should be growth. An unresolved issue with the federal government is what are they going to do about accountability with No Child Left Behind? Can we hold teachers accountable and schools accountable in 2014, 2015, when admittedly it's a phase-in process? So the whole phase-in of this is, and the consequences of Common Core is a big argument between the state governments and the federal government at this point. So then we're redoing over here all our assessments, including, so we have machinery to do that. This is Smarter Balanced at the bottom there. That's the one that includes 22 other states. We're really happy with what they're doing, but they're not going to apply, they will not supply an Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 exam unless we pay it for them. So at this point we're also contracting with them for more tests. And then over here is what I alluded to, accountability. You have to align, you know, the big movement in American education policy for the last 30 years or so has been to hold schools accountable, and then more recently, to hold teachers accountable, and by that we mean accountable for outcomes, what students know and are able to do, not what services you provided them, because the services may not lead to outcomes. So we're in a big process of revising accountability for the Common Core. And note that we have a law that says assessments, meaning tests, for high schools only at this point, can be no more than 60%, and something else must be 40%. And I don't have a good idea what the something else is. So we have currently an academic performance index in California with one element of tests. And so the legislature has, I think, correctly said enough of this, and you need to get on with it, but we're still developing that. And accountability then is a work in progress. So, implications, and then I'll take some questions. I talked about professional development and the fact that that is crucial and only partially funded, even with the governor's $1 billion. The materials alignment and supports for teachers as they work on this, and our materials meaning, for example, books and digital materials, that's an issue. We're worried about the technology. These tests are computer adapted. And in other states, we're doing a pilot test and then another pre-trial test before 14-15. But in a number of places, the bandwidth blew up. They couldn't load the stuff fast enough. There were delays. And so that's out there now. So we are doing a technology assessment, but you can do this if you have a number of weeks to do it. If you have, even in a school, a good computer lab, we can get them into the computer lab, assess them, and then move students through the computer lab. So you don't need, you know, ubiquitous hardware around the school room, but technology's an issue. The assessments are still being developed. Higher education is still working with us on defining the cut scores on the assessments and how they're going to say, we want the higher ed to say, if you're at college and career ready on the Common Core test, then you will not be in a remedial course. We guarantee you placement in a credit-bearing course. So they're going to agree to that. I don't think there's any problem with that here. That's a bigger problem. And then communication to groups like you. We need this is a big change, a heavy lift, and we need a big PR campaign because most parents think this won't look like the school I went to. And most parents think they are immaculately educated, and therefore, when they look at something that's very different from what they had, it's like, there go those liberal, crazy, Dewey-esque constructionist people hatched out of these schools of education. They're going off in another left-wing toot, and we need to stop this. So we already have a group in Indiana called Mothers Against Common Core. So we will, but we do need people to understand this. So and what's going on here, and why it's going on, and that it's going to be. There'll be some bumps on the road in the phase-in, and we need to withstand the attacks. One of the leading attackers is a guy named Bill Evers over at the Hoover Institution here. He spends most of his day thinking of attacks on the Common Core and quickly circulating any glitch that is out there, even in a pilot test. And so we're going to have to withstand that, and we need something there. So I'll stop there. And be happy to take questions from you or reactions, protests, whatever.
Thank you. So I'm curious if this is going to change, these test problems are going to change, and the testing is going to change. How will that affect the SATs and AP tests? And so essentially it's going to change what college ready means.
Great question, and I'm glad you asked it. One of the answer is yes, those will definitely change. And the chief author of the English Language Arts Common Core Standards was a man named David Coleman. And David Coleman was hired as the head of the College Board. The SAT is run by the College Board. The Educational Testing Service is their contractor. The Educational Testing Service will build a test according to the specifications the College Board want. Coleman's announced that he will align the SAT with the Common Core standards as soon as possible, and it'll be done pretty quickly, probably by 2015. They've tuned up the SAT 1 a little bit, but boy, that was I think, that had a lot of trick questions in it, and it was really not based on this kind of stuff. The ACT is topping SAT. They are going to have a Common Core aligned assessment. I haven't seen it, and I'll believe it when I see it, but they're going to have it in 2014, a year before the assessment consortium are coming out, and they're going to try and sell it to states as an alternative to these two consortium that the Obama administration funded. We're in one called Smarter Balanced Assessment Corporation, Smarter Balanced Assessment Group, and so they're out there already saying we're going to change it. We're going to have performance exams where you have to have much longer time, and can't all be done on computer. I mean, all of this is quite interesting. So the opponents will have it. That's an important development. Opponents of Common Core will have a tough time because if the college assessments are aligned to Common Core, then they're going to have to get the college assessments to change back to where they were. That's going to be a heavy lift. And so this is again, my theme of alignment and coherence. You went right to that point. You got this whole higher ed system. That currently plagues us now, is that the current ACT, SAT are not particularly well designed. And College Board has already been overhauling AP. I mean, the biology exam used to be just terrible. It was, straight memorization of stuff. And they finally, got the word, and they've already done some things with biology. So that's one of the really hopeful things. If higher ed and elementary, secondary ed can hold together as a coalition in this, it'll be a very important thing. And the signs for that are very positive at this point. Yeah.
So, thank you. This is about 100 questions, but I'll limit it to sneaking two. What do you think is the most compelling argument against Common Core? And is the California School Boards Association come out in favor?
They have, yeah. All the major education groups have come out in favor of this. The major argument against it is that it's an impossible dream. We've been here before with John Dewey. There may be some old people in the room that remember a thing called California Learning Assessment System. It was called CLASP. Tried to implement something, akin to the Common Core in the mid-'80s under former State Superintendent Bill Honig. And it was defeated. It was implemented before it was perfected, so this is like the test plane that crashed in terms of some of the technical aspects of it, and particularly the assessments. And it just, there was a large organizations that wanted a more traditional education. So what you've got here is a fight between a view of, we want education to be the way it has been, going back really to the 19th century, and the argument that we need to change to the 21st century. And so you'll have that push and tug, and then you'll have a very difficult thing to implement. And so it could crash and burn. And therefore, the opponents would argue it's just too bold, too risky, it's a reach too far. If you will. I think they might say, well, we should incrementalize into this very slowly or something like that, rather than the big change. So that's a legitimate argument when you've got a system as big as the system of public education in the United States.
It seems like, I'm surprised that conservative, like Tea Party and Hoover would come out against it. It doesn't seem to be something that would be...
Well, they're more for traditional education.
But this isn't just higher standards.
But they're more for decentralization too.
Well, yeah, decentralization. Yeah, they're arguing it's federally imposed. Now, I think that's a specious argument because the 45 states got into this before. But they're arguing it's a federal takeover, and I said Obama Corps. So when Obama, he helped for sure. And we couldn't be doing this without the assessment money and some of the other things the federal government's done. But when he got into it, then he personalized it around him, and all you have to do is wave that flag Obama, and we'll be shooting. So Common Core, which was never conceived as a federal effort, we knew right away that the national curriculum, a federal thing. Yeah, even Jerry Brown, when I first talked to him about it, he said, I'm hearing national and standardized. And I don't like too much either of those things. And so it takes a while, even with people that are in this game, to begin to understand that. So if you can reframe a debate around, too much centralization, too much federal government.
But it's understandable. It doesn't say how to get there, right? I mean, it's really left up to the individual.
Yeah, it's left up there, but of course we are collaborating. I mean, the great thing is, California doesn't have to do this on its own anymore. We used to do our own tests, our own books, and that we adopted statewide and made the publishers make changes. And so now we have a common market where I can take stuff from New York. We will adopt, I'm sure, materials developed by New York City for New York City, and use them because they're ahead of us in some of these materials. So You have an interstate combines, but we are working, so we are working to the same thing. Yes, the how of doing it is flexible, but if you're a critic, you can still say, who's ever saying what, the old thing of who's ever determining what knowledge is most worth knowing. That's your key in that regard, and the Common Core standards define what knowledge is most worth knowing. Yeah.
It sounds like this is aiming a lot more at creative thinking and critical thinking, which are two of the main complaints by industry, and specifically Silicon Valley, that American students aren't prepared and can't fill those jobs. Has there been any political capital generated from that?
Yes, as soon as these attacks began to come, and it was really only in the last 2 months, and the endorsement against Common Core by the Republican National Committee, the business groups really are beginning to unload. So you'll see statements and agitation, Wall Street Journal editorials, business-driven. They are part of this, that's for sure. They call this something different, 21st century learning skills. And they have some aspects to 21st century, they mean business, 21st century learning skills that go beyond Common Core that we're not ready to really tangle with. But yeah, the business community is on board. Silicon Valley, whenever I present this in Silicon Valley, they just go crazy, love it, And so there's tremendous local support for this among business.
Well, along with that, with the advent of tablets, iPads and Android tablets and stuff, could that make the education delivery piece a lot easier in terms of electronic learning, rather than worrying about running things through computers, which may or may not be very reliable?
They can. Moreover, the smarter balanced assessment you'll be able to take on a tablet. So, but then we get into the whole technology issue, and you need to have Larry Cuban come and talk about that. I'm old enough to remember when radio was going to change things, then it was television, then it was business machines, and I was told by our techies here, wait till we get handheld materials, that'll revolutionize teaching. Well, as you know, you check the handheld materials at the door of a school because bullying and they're not paying attention and so on. I always wondered what these students were doing in my classes. They were always looking at Stanford at these computers. And so Vanderbilt had some people unobtrusively walk around, and they weren't on task at all. They were on Facebook and all over the place. So technology's a long discussion, but it's been extremely frustrating. Frank.
Can you speak a little bit about the accountability features? Because the theory of change in No Child Left Behind is very sanction-based, and you see that shifting at all to kind of help schools that aren't meeting KPI goals or AYP goals?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. Arnie Duncan was in this area 2 weeks ago. He spoke at ARA, and they just hammered him on this question because they set certain accountability frameworks under No Child Left Behind that even if you get a quote state waiver, you have to meet them. The states are ready for a pause on accountability. Basically, the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, had Randy Weingarten said, give the test as soon as possible, because that'll make it real for school people. I agree with that. But postpone the consequences of accountability for a year or two, and then bring them in. And that's what we're proposing in California as well. But the feds can trump us on that by requiring accountability, and so it's up to whether they can get their act together. They're still thinking a lot backwards rather than forwards in terms of backwards of the old accountability. There's a lot of civil rights groups that are struggling with this as well in terms of how to keep accountability going. It's an unknown question. So the whole phase-in plan, I presented you with what we know about phase-in. Mike Smith, the former dean here, he says Common Core will really be in these classrooms sometime between 2018 and 2020. That's when you'll look to see whether, yeah, well, it'd be widespread, you can see whether it's quote, working or not in some sense. So that's to be determined, and Duncan's beginning to sense changes here. He can do it with waivers. The No Child Left Behind Act allows the Secretary of Education to issue a waiver, meaning you don't have to abide by the law, and he can do it without Congress. Congress is hopeless. I mean, they can't agree on the time of day. And so that it'll have to be administrative. So we'll see where the Obama administration goes with it. But that's a crucial issue. Yeah.
Are there any bodies that are responsible for certifying educational material as Common Core?
Yeah, we have a thing called the Instructional Quality Commission, newly created by new legislation. It's headed as my appointee by former State Superintendent Bill Mahoney, who's the head of that. And we do have that, and they're underway now. And we've already endorsed some. There are some things out there. So we will be able to do that. But if you can't endorse materials until you have a teaching framework. So you have a standards, that's the Common Core standards. Then you have a curricular framework, which guides teachers and educators in how to implement the standards. And then you do your materials. So in English language arts, we're still developing the framework, the middle part. So the assessment's coming a lot faster than the capacity building. And I think that's okay as long as, and we use the assessment as, this is, gets you more informed about what you must be doing. And we also are phasing in what are called formative assessments, where you teachers give students, shorter, it used to be quiz type things, and then they can work from that. So, but we are on the road to that. We have a process, and it's much more locally flexible. We're really just putting a seal of endorsement on materials and saying these are Common Core aligned. We recommend you use these, but we're letting the districts use what they want or need. Yes.
And just to piggyback on that, is anything like that happening at the national level, or is that just going to be state by state? Because the one you mentioned is California based.
Right. It's slow to develop nationally. There's a number of things that are slow to develop. With 45 states in this, why do I need to do this here? Why don't we have somebody else doing it? And it hasn't quite gelled yet. There's more talk of it, but nothing so far. Surprising and disappointing.
Could you comment on the implications for subjects other than English and math?
Well, the science is, science is really a tremendous overhaul, and we will approve the science materials at the California State Board either in July or September, so one or the other. I hope it will be the first in the country to do it. The science standards were written by a woman here named Helen Quinn. What department? I don't know what she's in.
Medicine.
Medicine, okay. Yeah, she is the genius of the science, the next generation science standards. And everybody says she's got it just, mostly all right. We have to put everything under her vision, really. So I think science will come along fairly quickly. History, social studies, I don't know. There's no movement there at all. That's significant. Yeah.
Well, I was looking because when all of the testing is in math and
Yeah,
science
and,
and English, what happens to all of these other classes? Suddenly they feel like they're not important anymore.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, every teachers group I know wants less testing, but they want more in my subject. Because of why? Because of what you said. What gets tested gets taught. Therefore, if you're not testing something, the time is traded off in school towards what's tested. So your concern is shared there. And so I think that, we will be phasing in some science. But then you get to the question of, that being said, you get to a problem of policy overload. You're shoving too much at the schools too fast. And so while I agree with this problem that you have pointed out, we're also worried about overwhelming the schools with too much and you end up doing nothing when you try and do it all. So this is a dilemma, and I think in the short run, we're going to just risk the other subjects at this point. Although I think there's a downside to that, but I don't see any alternative.